Come closer, you guys. We're going to start here in a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to get started. Everyone, aloha. Aloha. So for those of you that don't know me,
You might be one. You never know.
my name is Mike from PGB. Kidding. First and foremost, we want to thank every one of you for taking the time to come out and participate in our quarterly PGB community meeting. This is something that we plan to do on a regular basis. A couple of housekeeping items for those of you who aren't aware. The men's restroom are to the left and women to the right. So for tonight, I'm going to start off with providing an update with what's going on at the plant. But before I do that, if you look at our agenda, we've got a few main talking points that we're going to stick to tonight. And we've got our contractors from Honolulu, Cardinal TEC, which is the environmental company. Karen Riddler is right there. She'll be speaking first after I give the update. And we're going to have Paul Thompson from Reno talk a little bit about pricing. And we also asked a representative from the consumer advocacy, Mr. John Itomura, also to say a few words. So we're going to go through this process here, this agenda, and at the end, we'll open it up to Q&A. And if anything comes up that may not be on our agenda for tonight, we'd be happy to take any comments, suggestions. Like I said, we plan to do additional community meetings, and we will definitely bring that in. And if anyone has any questions that may not be directly with this, you can always check with Heidi, and Heidi's going to help collect them all for our next meeting. Okay, so what's going on at PGB right now? We are basically at our full capacity of about 34 megawatts. Our contract is for 38 megawatts. And the reason why we're not at 38 yet is that we are still in the process of connecting the last production well that we drilled, KS-15. So that's been taking some time. We're still working on that. But in the interim, we were able to declare commercial operation with Helco. The commercial operation date was in mid-March. What that means is that we're allowed to generate up to 34 megawatts on a regular basis, and Helco essentially has been keeping us at the maximum output. And you'll see one of the main reasons why later on when Paul talks about the pricing. So for the remainder of the year, our plan is to try to get our new well connected to our plant. And we were just performing routine maintenance. There is one job that we have slated for mid-November, and it involves a drilling rig. The rig is a truck-mounted rig, so it's not the same size as the one that we used on KS-15, which was up on the hill. That job is slated to begin probably around Thanksgiving, plus or minus, and it should last about a week. What's involved in the job is there is a section of piping that needs to be replaced in the well. So we're going to remove what's there and install new piping. Relatively straightforward. We had to get approvals from DLNR, from Department of Health, Air Branch, Department of Health, the Clean Water Branch, and EPA, Safe Drinking Water. So we've got all those permits in hand. We're just getting ready to schedule the work. So That's the latest update with PGV. So what I'd like to do is move on to our noise and H2S monitoring and ask Karen to please come up.
Hello, my name is Karen Brightlow, and as you said, I'm with Cardno TEC, and we are a consulting firm that assists PGV with some of their environmental monitoring services. Oh, right here? Can you hear me now? A little bit closer? Okay, I'll go ahead and repeat that real quick. So my name is Karen Brightlow, and I'm with Cardno TEC, and we are an environmental consulting company, and we are helping PGV with some of their environmental monitoring. So we support PGV by operating, calibrating, and providing routine maintenance for the 3 monitoring stations that PGV owns and that are located around the project boundary of the plant. And we do that to ensure compliance. Our main focus is compliance with the applicable permits, mainly the geothermal resource permit and the non-covered source permit. So the first thing I'm going to go over with you today, we have some new features that are going to be available to you very soon on a website. We have a few modifications that our coding people with IT are still working on, but that should be up and running fairly shortly, and PGV will let you know as soon as you can access this website. So this is going to be the home page. Normally what you guys see when you go to the PGV public website is just a snapshot, what the latest data is for the past 5-minute average of noise in H2S. So we want to be able to provide you with a bit more history where you can pick whatever time frame you want to look at, and you'll see that data graphed. So, and I'm sorry if you can't see in the back, it's slightly kind of small print, but the top options, you see some fields up top, and the first one is for noise data, and then below it is the H2S data, and you're going to be able to select the year, the month, the day, and the hour. Now to keep loading time down, you may see some changes in the maximum that's shown, and that's because the yearly data is shown by averaging the months, and the monthly data is shown by averaging the day. The day data is shown by averaging the hour, and the hour data is shown by averaging the 5-minute averages. That is pretty much the raw data that goes to the server. So here, I just picked 2011 as the sample year, and this is the noise data for that year. At the bottom is the months on the x-axis, y-axis is the decibel level. And if you want to click on the next one. And this shows both site A and B. We don't have noise monitor at site C, and we'll go into Y in a minute. This is the monthly data. I just chose August, so I just picked some random months. And again, you have your days for the month at the bottom, your decibel level on the y-axis. Next. And then this is day 4 of the month. Again, just a randomly selected day. And both sites, here you see where the coqui frogs are in the evening, but you have the full 24 hours shown here. Okay. And then this is hour 5. Just picked a random number so you can see how it goes with the 5-minute average data for noise at site A and site B. So that's just a sample. We do have the website, the draft website running in the background, so if you have questions specifically about it, at the end we can walk you through that a little bit. I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the features you'll be able to access very soon. Okay. So I know that the parameter we monitor for that seems to be of most interest is hydrogen sulfide. Our permitted levels, so our threshold is 0.025 parts per million, which is equivalent to 25 parts per billion. A lot of times we switch back and forth between the 2 units for a 1-hour average. Or the other threshold is 0.010 parts per million, which is equivalent to 10 parts per billion for a 24-hour rolling average. So those are our permitted thresholds, so you just want to keep those in mind as we go through the rest. Okay, I think this is a map most of you have probably seen several times, pretty familiar with. We have the different well pad locations. Our monitoring sites are here, Site A, Site B, Site C. I added in the well pad B, KS15, that's the new addition, and that's located just east of the plant itself. Site A, why did we locate it here? So one of the primary reasons, this is where the nighttime winds tend to come across the plant towards Site A from the northwest direction. It's also located near the emergency steam release facility. So if there was an emergency release, that's why we hope to capture it at this site here. Site B is the other primary monitoring site where we really look at the data in particular, and that's because during the daytime, the winds are coming from the northeast, again coming across the plant, and especially it's the closest area where we have residences to well pad E. So that's why we have Site B here. Site C was later added as part of a H2H request, and here we only have the H2S and the meteorological data being collected, not the noise. Okay? H2S data collection. So I kind of wanted to show you the setup we have inside the trailer. We have the actual intake located above the trailer. It comes down through some piping. I'll go through a little diagram with you for this in a minute. But here we have some of our old data, loggers and equipment, that we still keep as backup. But we've updated a lot of it in around 2002 and 2003 to really bring it up to par, make sure the technology is pretty current. We have a data logger. We have the SO2 analyzer. We have an H2S converter. A number of components go into this, and we'll go through that in a minute. All H2S continuous analyzers are calibrated according to Section 12, which is the calibration section of the Quality Assurance Handbook for Air Pollution Measurement Systems, Volume 2, Ambient Air Specific Methods, 2008. That's kind of the holy grail of all things air monitoring. The range of our sensor, typically, we have it set to 0 to 1 part per million, which is equivalent to 1,000 parts per billion. Now, if we do have H2S levels that are above this 1.0 part per million, it can auto range up to higher scale, and then it'll go up to 20 parts per million or 20,000 parts per billion, which this is high enough to capture the kind of levels that that were recorded during that initial blowout back in the 1990s. So this is a little schematic of how the H2S sensor works. We have, like I said, we have our sample intake on the trailer roof, and that's located about 5 meters above the ground. It comes through the sample manifold. We have, most of the air still goes through, and we have an intake blower, and it goes outside the trailer, but we take a sub-sample of that air that comes through this line. We have a water trap, which collects any kind of condensation that can sometimes collect in the tubings to make sure that our data integrity is what it should be. It goes through to this black box here. And this is where we have our H2S converter, where ambient SO2 is removed by some scrubbers, and then we convert the H2S to SO2, which is read by this analyzer here, the 9850B, and that is an EPA accepted monitor there, analyzer. And then that goes through the pump, and we discharge back out of the trailer. So we just have this constant, continuous flow that we're monitoring data. Data quality assurance. We do a lot of things to make sure the data integrity is what it needs to be to meet EPA regulations. We perform a multi-point calibration 1 time every 3 months, so that's done quarterly. And it's also done after any initial analyzer startup, repair, relocation, or excessive drift. Now what happens during this calibration? We run a 0, so we have something with absolutely no H2S at all to make sure our baseline is accurate. We run a high concentration, which is that should be 80 to 90% of the full range of the instrument. and then we have 3 intermediate concentrations spaced out evenly across that range. Then we have what we call a zero span or a level 1 check. That's required to be done 1 time every 2 days. We do it every single day. That's something I know some of you noticed on the old website where we had some elevated levels. We had these automated calibrations that were going on, and this is what measures and tracks the zero and the span drift. So we run the zero again for these span checks, and we also run at 80% of the range concentration. We also have a precision check, which is done once a week, so 1 time every 7 days, and this assesses the analyzer precision. So this runs at, again, the zero, and then we have a lower range at 0.08 to 0.10 parts per million, which is equivalent to 80 to 100 parts per billion. We also check our flow meter 2 times per year. The shelter temperature, which is the temperature inside the trailer, is monitored continuously, because if it goes outside this range of 15 to 35 degrees Celsius, the data that is recorded by our H2S analyzer becomes questionable, so we make sure that our data is being collected within this range of temperature, and the accuracy of that temperature sensor is verified 2 times every year. And then we have completeness. We are required to have a certain amount of the data collected being valid, so we can't have data that isn't meeting all of these requirements that are set by the EPA beyond a certain acceptable error, which is usually when we're actually doing our calibrations and maintenance, because we aren't collecting data while we do that. Completeness, annually, it has to be at least 80%, and on an hourly basis, 45 minutes of that data has to be acceptable by EPA criteria. All right, meteorological parameters. We measure several. We have wind speed, wind direction, turbulence, relative humidity, air temperature, and precipitation. So for our meteorological parameters, we do an accuracy check 2 times every year. And I was just out here yesterday doing exactly that with our on-site engineer and technician. And we go through all of these different sensors for the meteorological parameters. This is our tower. It goes up to about 10 meters. And we have our temperature sensor and a relative humidity located at 2 meters. And then our wind direction and wind speed are towards the top at 10 meters. We also have a performance audit performed twice a year by another contractor, E.B. Neal and Associates, which is located over in Kona. We have a measurement threshold, which is also done at the same time we do the accuracy check with our metcals, which again we just did yesterday. That's twice a year, and that gives us our baseline. That tells us what our sensors can actually measure and what's detectable. Completeness, same thing as H2S. We need to hit a certain completeness percentage. Annually, it's 90%. Hourly, at least 30 minutes. Noise. Since HDOH changed the requirement for this Class C zoning district, which is what PGV falls into, it's not to exceed 70 decibels for a 5-minute average. We have an automatic alarm that goes to the operators if it hits 68. We took a little bit more of a conservative view so they know if there's a problem before we even hit this 70 decibel level, and they can try to address that and correct it. So we use a Quest Electronics Model 2800 sound level monitor that has a range of 20 to 80 decibels. Sound accuracy check, this is part of the QA, QC, that quality assurance that we do. 1 time every month. Go ahead and test that at a 1 point, what we call 1 point calibration. So we have a set noise level and we check that. And a manufacturer calibration, we send the sensors back to the manufacturer once a year. And I think that's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Karen. Appreciate it. Well, maybe. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Thompson, and I'm the Director of Policy and Business Development for Ormat Technologies. I'm based in our Reno office, and I want to echo Mike's comment to thank you all for being here. And my presentation, I really just kind of want to walk through a a presentation that we've given to the Public Utilities Commission in Hawaii, and have been making to Rotary clubs and chambers of commerce to kind of explain to folks what our mission and goal from a business perspective is. And so it's really going to touch on kind of three topics. One, what the power plant is doing and where we are today with it. Two, what the pricing is. We've heard a lot of, in a lot of the political debates and so forth, we've heard pricing information all over the place. And so we want to give you the facts on our pricing so that you guys have that. And then finally, kind of regulatory and policy issues that affect our ability to, that range from developing new projects and really limit us in Hawaii. So with that, the first slide, I think we can skip right by, is our disclaimer. For those of you who don't know, we're a publicly traded company. The reason for the disclaimer is if you want to invest in us, you do so at your own risk, and if you lose everything by doing so, we're held harmless. But what this also means is you can almost see everything we're going to talk about. We have a 10K document we file annually. We have a 10Q we file quarterly. And so you can look at all the background information on Ormat Technologies, which is now the parent company for PGV. And we became the parent company in 2004. I know there's a lot of questions about our name being involved in documents in the past and so forth. And so I'm happy to take questions about that. Ormat, by way of background, has been a company since 1964. And we started designing and manufacturing equipment for people all over the world. Today, our equipment is located in something like 71 countries. And it wasn't until about 2004 or 2003 that we started looking at becoming an operator and developer. And the reason being is before that, we sold equipment to third parties. So Constellation, who ran PGV, would have purchased equipment from us, and you'll see our name as an equipment supplier to lots of people. But it's only very, somewhat recently that we became an owner and operator of power plants. Moving on, I'm going to talk quickly about Hawaii, our PGV operations, our fiscal impact, the realities of development, and our policy and regulatory considerations. As you all know, Hawaii has one power plant. It produces about 38 megawatts, or 20% of the Big Island's power. The project has been developed incrementally. This is very important to point out that we don't typically just build 100 megawatt projects or 50 megawatt projects. We tend to build them in smaller sizes. And this is because we have to match the power plant to the resource. If you build a coal plant or a natural gas plant, you build the plant the size you want and you purchase enough fuel to power that plant. But what we have to do, if you want to be successful in the geothermal industry, you've got to make sure that your plant matches the resource. You can't fool Mother Nature. And many developers have learned that lesson the hard way. They build a 50 megawatt project. They realize that the resource can only really sustain 30 megawatts. They have a huge capital expenditure that they can't pay off. And so when you read about other developers struggling with their projects, it's because they got caught up in the hype, or they had to please investors, and they built the plant before really knowing what that resource maintained. And you see this example even at PGV. It started with a smaller plant, and then we've added on incrementally to the full 38 megawatts you have today. Currently, as Mike talked about, Helco doesn't have to take all of the power from PGV. We added, and we'll get to it, we've added additional power to the facility, and our contracts have the ability for curtailment. And what this means is Helco has said, we'll take your power when we need it, but when we don't need it, we're going to curtail you because we're 30% over capacity on the Big Island of Hawaii. So the big picture here is that Helco has enough power. They've purchased this additional power for ancillary benefits, and we do some really neat things with it. But the bigger question for future development is, where are we going to sell the power? Because if we don't have confidence that Helco is going to purchase that power, we can't justify the large exploration costs to develop any more projects on the Big Island. There is... Yeah. And And one of the neat things about geothermal is, and renewables, it's one of the neat things and it's one of the barriers that we can't get over is we have to sell the electricity in a local market. We can't barrel it up. We can't ship it anywhere. There's no cable to move this energy. And so we're really confined with working in the local markets of where we develop this project. And that's true in all of the lower 48 states and so forth, which is good for the local community because you really have a say over how much we charge for electricity. And that's important because, you know, we were at the PUC hearing the other night and everybody was talking about the price of diesel. Well, the price of diesel is high, not because of your consumption of it, but because of the world's consumption of it. If they can't sell it to you for $85 a barrel, they're going to sell it somewhere else. You don't have that market force on renewable energy. Your solar, your geothermal, your wind is going to be the price set by the PUC here in this local community. And that's something to really take to the bank because as fossil fuels become more and more competitive, renewables are going to become more and more and more valuable. And everybody on Hawaii should, I mean, you know that better than anybody in the lower 48 because you're paying 40 some odd cents for your electricity. Next slide. We have a 38 megawatt air-cooled facility. We expanded 8 megawatts in 2011. We re-inject all the fluids and 100% of the fluids are injected into the geothermal reservoir. We've done recent upgrades to noise. Next slide. This is a diagram that I'll try to walk you through to kind of explain what's unique about our design, and I'll try to keep it as basic as possible. But when we say we have 100% re-injection of all of our fluids and all of our emissions, that's because when we designed this facility, we designed it as a closed loop system. And so what I'm going to describe to you is normal operations. And then you can ask questions about upset conditions when we have bypasses and things. What we do is we have a production well, which you all heard drilling very recently. And we try to encounter this reservoir. We need 3 things for geothermal development. We need heat, we need permeability, and we need water. You live on a very large volcano, so we're pretty confident there's good heat. The trick is finding where the permeability is and where the water is. And this is what we try to do through drilling. We try to encounter fractures and find places where we can bring up that warm water, which has the energy, if you think of it that way. The heat is in the Earth's crust, it's in the rocks. The energy, or the medium to transfer that heat to our power plant is in the water, or what we call geothermal brine. B-R-I-N-E. And geothermal brine contains all of the fun chemical elements that are naturally occurring in the ground. And in a volcanic region, you've got a lot of exciting things, and most notably is H2S. So when we bring up this hot geothermal brine, it comes up, and we're missing a little part of this diagram, but basically when the water comes out of pressure, it turns to steam. And that steam has pressure. And that pressure wants to relieve itself, and it does so across a turbine. And this turbine starts to spin. And you've simply taken thermal energy and converted it to mechanical energy by spinning this turbine. Now we could stop there. The very first geothermal project was built in 1905 in Lardetto, Italy. And they drilled a well, probably for farm animals. The water came up, turned to steam. They said, let's stick a turbine on there. They spun it around and then let this thing vent into the atmosphere. This is the case in the geysers in California or in Iceland. So then all the steam goes up into the atmosphere. It collects in the clouds, it condenses, it rains, and it tries to recharge that ground water aquifer. But in places like Hawaii, we don't like all the stuff that comes out of if we just let it go into the atmosphere, we'd have to scrub it and do all sorts of things with it. So we want to re-inject it. So we take this steam and run it through our stage 1 turbine and then run it through a vaporizer. And what we're doing in this vaporizer is heating a secondary working fluid. That secondary working fluid, I think many of you are familiar with, it's called pentane. Isopentane is a hydrocarbon you can buy on the market. It somewhat resembles propane, like you'd have at your barbecue. And what's neat about pentane is that it vaporizes at a lower temperature than water boils. So we can make the pentane vaporize and build pressure from hot water. So after we have the steam, we're using the residue steam and hot water to heat our secondary working fluid. That vaporizes, builds pressure, and turns our second turbine. Now we've got 2 turbines turning, we're very efficient, and that's the kind of base model of what's going on at Puna Geothermal Venture. What's unique about this picture is that we have this pipe coming off of here, which contains our non-condensable gases. And what this means is when the geothermal fluid is coming up, there are gases that come out of solution. And in many power plants in the lower 48, again, we just vent that. It's called fugitive emissions. It's very small, and we don't worry about it. In Hawaii, we're very concerned. So we take that non-condensable gases, we condense it in a pump here, and then re-inject it back into the injection well. We also take all that steam and geothermal brine that we've used twice now, we run it through a preheater, which you can't see, but to start heating up our working fluid again, and then re-inject 100% of that back into the ground. What's nice about this model from a business perspective is that with good reservoir engineering, we're re-injecting 100% of the fluids. We can model and kind of know how long this power plant is going to operate, and we don't have to deal with things like Mother Nature and rain and recharging the groundwater, because we're re-injecting it back into the ground where it gets hot, it matriculates back across the rocks in the fissures and things that, the permeability I spoke about, and then we produce it again. So you have one loop here going this way, which is all the working fluid or geothermal brine, and then you have a loop here of the working fluid, the isopentane, which then goes through the turbine, we cool it, it turns back into a liquid, it starts to get preheated, it comes up here, it flashes, builds pressure, moves across the turbine or the fan blade, and this is a continuous loop. And so when this plant is operating, normally 100% re-injection of the geothermal brine, 100% capture of the working fluid. Now, in upset conditions and so forth, and Mike can answer questions about that, there are times when we bypass some of this to deal with pump speeds and turbines and things, and we can get into details about that. The current expansion brought to light the fact that we needed to explain to folks the different contracts we have on this one facility. So we have 3 different contracts with Helco. One is a 25 megawatt contract, which is an avoided cost contract that was negotiated when the power plant came online in, Mike, the year 1993. Since Ormat has owned the facility, we've brought on 2 additional contracts at what we call a fixed price. One was for 5 megawatts at 11.8 cents, fixed price. The other one was 8 megawatts at a price that was either 9 cents at peak or 6 cents at off peak. What's interesting about this, and the question we should all be asking is, whoa, that's a big difference. Avoided cost today, what is avoided cost? And man, I wish I was paying 6 cents for my power bill. The reason we were able to offer such an attractive rate on these 2 additions is because they were technology advances. We didn't have to drill new wells. We put in a new bottoming cycle power plant, which allowed us to produce more power. And this is something to keep in mind. The drilling that we've done to date is really to fulfill or sustain these existing 38 megawatt contracts. So the next slide shows, if you take the avoided cost. So if you go to Helco's website today, you'll see that the avoided cost for 9/1/12 on peak is about 19 cents, and off peak is about 14 cents. What's really neat about this chart, if you go to their website and just Google Helco avoided cost, is you'll see that these numbers vary wildly. This chart on their current website goes back to 2008. If you go back to 2003, you'll see it ranges from peak power of 12 cents to 19 cents. And anyways, that's all based on the price of oil and what Helco can procure oil for today. The average of on-peak and off-peak is 16.74 cents. That is the avoided cost today. And what avoided cost is if the utility had to go out and produce 1 more megawatt of power, what would they pay to do so? And the PUC has decided that that price today is 16.74 cents. Okay? Next slide. If you take our 25 megawatt contract, our 5 megawatt and our 8 megawatt, and you take a weighted average, so you blend that based on the megawatts there, you see that our average price is about 14.14 cents. So the power we're selling Helco altogether is about 2 cents below the avoided cost today. Why does that matter? The next slide shows that if you just take that base case, we're saving ratepayers about $822,000 a year, or $16 million over the life of the project. And this is a very, very low assumption, because what this number doesn't include is I'm just comparing that to purchasing more diesel. If Helco wanted to build more diesel plants or more natural gas plants, they'd have to build the facility. And guess who pays for that facility? All the ratepayers. And they get a rate of return on that. That's not included in this because, most of their plants have depreciated and they removed it. So when you read that article in the paper and it says renewables account for 30% of your bill, fuel oil is another 30%, our overhead and transmission and facilities is 30%, you really got to add those two 30% together to figure out what they're charging for power, because they're buying the fuel, but they've also had to buy and pay off that facility. But nevertheless, just using the base analysis, $16 million, if you include the cost of their diesel generators and things like that, and their O&M, that number gets significantly bigger. And this is just the final thing to point out, is that when we sell power, the next slide please, we just get paid for the electricity we deliver to the utility. They don't pay for our operations and maintenance, and they don't pay for our facility. And so I took this great quote from HECO spokesman Peter Rosig, who said, IPPs are great because all we're paying for is the electricity. The ratepayers are held completely harmless if we don't deliver any power to them. So just as a developer, we take all the risk of developing the facility. We're offering a price below the avoided cost of fuel, and we're taking all of the O&M and operations and maintenance of the facility and so forth. So that just gives you a snapshot of pricing. And I'll answer questions at the end about what we're doing with that first 25 megawatts at a avoided cost rate. Next slide. This is an example, just to kind of highlight some of that risk. When we procured PGV in 2004, the plant was producing about 5 megawatts. We had to do serious maintenance of the existing well field and so forth to get it up to production today. That has resulted in Ormat spending about $100 million to update the PGV facility. That's drilling additional wells, that's putting in the new binary bottoming, the state-of-the-art bottoming system, and other improvements around the facility. So the point here is that just the operations and maintenance is substantial, and Ormat is committed to doing that to keep this power plant operating as optimally and as consistent as possible into the future. Our experience, I won't spend a lot of time on, but we've developed a lot of projects around the world. We're the only vertically integrated developer today, and why that's important is, as Bob has pointed out, some of the problems developers have encountered in the past is that when you have one company build the facility, another company do the drilling, another company negotiate the power contract, there's a lot of parts that have to come together really nicely to make your project successful. Ormat has brought that all in-house. We design and manufacture the equipment, we do our own geological work and drilling and so forth, and we negotiate the contract. So when we have a problem with our facility, we can't point the fingers at somebody else and say, you didn't drill that well properly, or you didn't build that turbine right. Unfortunately, we have to point that finger at ourselves. And that's really made us successful in moving geothermal equipment in the future, because the margins in this industry, the profit margins are so tight. And so you'll read in the paper about a good example is Blue Mountain. Blue Mountain built a 50 megawatt project. They hired Ormat to sell them the equipment. So we sold them a 50 megawatt power plant. They had another company do the drilling and try to develop the resource. The resource today is not matching what the power plant can do. And so you have a big fight. The developer says, the drilling company didn't do their job right, or the power plant's not working, and they have a lot of internal fighting. At the end of the day, their power plant's producing about 18 megawatts, but they spent the capital for a 50 megawatt power plant, which is a burden that they will never, probably likely not get out from under. And it's a sad example of someone trying to build a 50 megawatt facility just too quickly without proving the resource. Just the last bullet I want to just highlight for a second, these acronyms here, for those of you who don't know, EPC is engineer, procure, and construct. That's if somebody wants to buy, if you would like to buy a power plant from Ormat, one of the options is we'll engineer it, we'll procure it, we'll build it for you, and we'll hand you the keys to run the power plant. The other option is a build, own, transfer. That's where Ormat will build the facility. We'll own it for a certain period of time, whether you want us to prove its worthiness, whether you're a government and there's tax implications or something, and then at a point in the future, we'll transfer it to you. Utilities like this, they don't like buying technology that isn't proven or so forth, so they might say, we want you to build it and operate it for 10 years, and then you can turn it over to us. And the last one is IPP, which stands for Independent Power Producer. And that's what PGV is on the Big Island, which is we own and operate the facility. We pay royalties to the state and folks, and we sell the power, and the only money we make is on the sale of electricity to Helco. From just a corporate perspective, 75% of our revenue comes from the sale of electricity, 25% approximately comes from the sale of equipment to third parties. Development realities. So now I want to kind of shift. You know about Ormat, you know about the pricing, and now what about the future of development on the Big Island or anywhere else for that matter? We like to start by showing people this inverted pyramid, because if you talk to developers, they'll tell you that they got a 500 megawatt project ready to go. All they got to do is procure the land, drill the wells, keep their fingers crossed, cross their toes, and voila. The reality is, getting from this prospect phase down to this field development financing stage costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. To give you some numbers, our typical development cost in the lower 48 is about $5 million per megawatt. So for a 10 megawatt project, that's a $50 million investment. 50% of that investment is locked up in doing exploration, drilling wells, permitting the project, and getting the field development and proving that reservoir. The second half of that development cost is the equipment, transmission, interconnection, and things like that. Why is that important? For us to get in the idea of spending this much money to explore to see if there's geothermal, we have to have a power purchase agreement. We have to know that there's an off-taker for that electricity, because as I stated earlier, if there's not, we're stuck. We can't ship the oil, we can't barrel it up, we don't have a USS Duracell, and so this is key. And this is why there's a problem with this concept that we're going to build hundreds of additional megawatts in Pahoa or the Big Island of Hawaii. We already produce 20% of the island's power. There's no need for additional power, so we would need some huge sign that Helco is going to pay for any additional power. And right now, that sign's not out there. There's an RFP. We've all heard about this request for proposal, but until they've created a demand for that power, we're suspicious. We don't know what's going to happen with that RFP. Next slide. Critical drivers, just to give you kind of, and I'll kind of run through these quick, but we have to know that there's a viable market to do the exploration, to spend the time and energy, to do all of the permitting that's required, to do all of that expensive drilling. We have to know that there's a viable market. Hawaii's got a problem today. You don't have a viable market. Realistic expectations. We've heard the governor talking about hundreds of megawatts and things like that. Even a 50 megawatt RFP on an island where there's been no additional exploration today, we don't feel is realistic. We would start much, if we were going to look at expansion, we'd start at 10 megawatts, 15 megawatts, see if we could find a resource and go from there. State and county, we believe, obviously have to be involved in leasing. This only becomes, there was a bill passed that mucked with the geothermal resource GRP permit. And we want to see that corrected this time at the legislature because home rule needs to be, the county needs to be a part of that process for transparency and future development. And that's just in all of the projects we've developed in the lower 48, that's key. The procurement process must use best practices. This is a concern for us because obviously, I think, and it's not a concern so much for ORMAT or PGV, but for the state, the RFP, the request for proposals, can either entice additional development or really shut it down. And what I mean by that is if you give a large contract to a right now we're 30% oversubscribed. If we just issue a 50 megawatt RFP to somebody, to Mike, bad example, Heidi Bethel to develop the project, every other credible developer is going to say Hawaii's closed for business. And so we've been urging the PUC and HELCO to look at smaller bite-sized pieces that can entice multiple developers to look at developing projects, for competitiveness and for the betterment of pricing. The next slides touch on the permitting. Just to give you time frames, this is kind of important. The typical exploration for us takes about 2 to 3 years. To move from exploration to compiling all of the data to proceed to the next level of releasing equipment for construction takes about another 2 years. To physically just build the power plant at our manufacturing facility takes another 2 to 3 years. If we were going to bid into an RFP today, it would be looking at 7 to 8 years from now of delivering power. And the problem with that is, if we're going to try to estimate what prices are in 8 years, because we're a business and a corporation, we're going to give you a big fat margin for our error. And if we want to offer the best prices, we think it's much more prudent to start discussing pricing and future projects after you've proven the resource, you've decided to commit to releasing the equipment for construction, because now you're much closer in time to when the power plant's going to be delivered. You have a much more realistic expectation on what your drilling costs are, and you can offer the most financially viable project to the market. Next slide talks about permitting. You've got a very comprehensive permitting process. There's some room for streamlining and so forth, but you've got 3 tiers of permitting that are required now, which is a little more stringent than you have in the lower 48. And that might be a result of the blowout and so forth, and rightly so. I know that some of the best management practices for drilling, the most stringent standards are here in Hawaii moving forward. And so, we want to keep those standards as high as possible, recognizing, however, that if you delay a project another 2 or 3 or 4 years in the permitting process, that has a dollar figure attached to it. And, we have projects that we built 10 years ago that the price sounds really good compared to today, and it'll sound really good if we wait 20 years from now to build them and say, man, we should have built more projects 10 years ago. Hindsight is always 20/20. Next slide. Are we almost done? Permitting needs to have a transparent process. We're fully supportive of that and hope to work with the legislature and the county on the GRP and permitting process. Next slide. The procurement process. I just want to highlight, for any project to go forward in geothermal, we feel that these 4 points have to be met. A developer has to have land position. They have to have full control of that position. They have to have development experience. They have to have resource confirmation. And they have to have financing. Financing doesn't sound like a big deal, but the cost of money today is so high in this market that if you have to go to the public markets to get money and you're paying 15 to 16% interest on your loan, the price that that person can offer to the ratepayers of Hawaii is not going to be as competitive as someone else who can self-finance projects. Hawaii's future geothermal development requires realistic expectations, a streamlined, transparent permitting process, and the use of best practices. If you can develop it, it's fantastic. It's firmly flexible. It can provide baseload power at below avoided cost. It can help the utility deal with all sorts of regulation and electrical problems and so forth, but it's not easy to do. And once you get the plant operating, it's an environmentally sound solution that blows away any of the competition when it comes to emissions and so forth. And my final note will be just talking about, geothermal is a commercial electrical option. We've heard a lot of talk in Hawaii about solar, and solar for direct use is probably the most efficient way you can use energy to offset your power rates, because instead of purchasing power for 44 cents, you're now paying zero because you produce minus the power, the cost of your solar panels for the power you don't need. Going back to that avoided cost figure, if you were to take that same solar and try to sell it to the utility, they'd only pay you 16 cents for it. So generating electricity from renewables is a very inefficient thing to do. But when it comes to the electricity that you need to have to run your buildings and your appliances 24 hours a day, geothermal really can't be beat in the capacity and electricity that it provides. That's it. That's my talking presentation, and I think with that, we want to thank all of you, and then take questions from anybody in the audience and go from there.
John.
Oh, I'm sorry. I tried to forget the consumer advocate. Man, almost blew right past you.
Paul, could you
Sure.
see the last policy slide that you went over that?
Sure. The 3 bullets I touched on.
Talk about the subzone.
Sorry? That's a permitting slide on the subzone designation. We'll take questions on that. Let me introduce
John?
John from the Consumer Advocate's Office to just say a few words about pricing, and please, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being here.
All right, thank you, Paul. Aloha.
Hello, John.
I actually had all these notes I prepared last night, highlighted, organized, and they were so well done I left them at work. So I think I'm going to use this time to really just talk story with you folks real briefly. Again, my name is John Itomura. I'm from the Consumer Advocate's Office. Oftentimes people confuse us with being the consumer protection and 2 separate offices. Same department, which is the Department of Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. Keep thinking I want to say Consumer Advocate. We are a division of Consumer Advocacy. My relationship with this island, personally, I see some familiar faces in the crowd. I started with the Attorney General's office, and I was doing Land Use Commission. So a lot of the developments out on the Kona side, I was coming over for a lot of those hearings. I met Vern back then, and then also did elections. I remember meeting Donald, and as well as campaign spendings. I've been all over the place. Last 10 years, I've been with the Consumer Advocate. So seeing and hearing about these issues that have cropped up very recently about energy, it does pique my own attention, because energy, I think, is a very, it's going to be a very hot topic going forward. And whenever consultants come into our office, even they're amazed that people, especially on this island versus other islands, are paying so much for electricity. So some misperceptions is that the Consumer Advocate people don't even know we exist oftentimes. You have people going in, they talk to the governor, they talk to the legislature, they talk to the DBED, and of course they talk to the PUC when they appear before them, and they forget that we're out there. Also, they feel that the Consumer Advocate should strictly be advocating for the rights of the consumers and the keeping the prices as low as they can. But what we found is that we're in a very tough situation, because we have to consider as a whole what's good for the consumers and not particular individuals. So as a maybe poor example, if someone has a specific issue with NIMBY, not in my backyard, whether it's a plant or even a substation, well, they have a very particular interest, and they'll say, why aren't you protecting that interest? But then we have to look at it as a whole, and how does it impact everybody else if they have to now relocate because it has to be put in, say, a substation. That's going to drive the cost of construction up. That's going to impact the rate case, and ultimately the rates that come out. So similarly with IPPs, when they come forward for with negotiating with the utility, just as an example, the last amendment for the PPA was filed, and correct me if I'm wrong, was filed in February of 2011. In August of 2011 is when the Consumer Advocate filed our statement of position. Then in December is when the commission issued their decision and order. And all I'm trying to point out is it's not a quick process. And what you should take away from that is that the devil is in the details. In a typical rate case, like currently we're undergoing interviews and basically research and discovery with Helco. You're talking reams and reams of paper, just reams. And as much as you may have misperceptions about the consumer advocate, you know, Paul mentioned you can't fool Mother Nature. I like to say you can't fool the consumer advocate. And so, of course, when Mike gave our office a call and said, we'd like to have you folks come and do a presentation at the monthly meetings, our first thought is, why? Because typically, we're not the first agency that an IPP would look at, you know, wanting to invite into their house. I mean, it's just not. And so I want to leave you with that thought that we're often, usually whether it's in-house, and we have a very small office trying to handle cases that range the whole gamut between energy, water, gas. So in fact, Waikoloa water cases are coming up for us. When we walk in there, those staff members don't want to see us coming. And they'll tell you that. I mean, they just hate that we will give them 100 questions about their operations. And that's 100 questions with subparts. So, you know, I want you to feel that you can always call our office. The process, as you probably all know, those of you that are here, you know, there's an application. The consumer advocate is statutorily mandated to be part of that process. We can choose to waive our participation, and sometimes we do. If it's something like transportation, we feel there's enough competition out there. You know, there's tour buses competing against each other every day, so we don't need to get involved in that. But when we get involved, all of that goes on record. And they have, the PUC has the document management system. It's online. You can go online now and pull up practically everything short of the confidential records. So you'll find there, the reason I mentioned that, you'll find there our statement of positions. You'll find there our questions. So oftentimes if you're searching for questions even, and I'm not even saying answers, if you're searching for questions, you could probably pop open the PUC's website, look under document management system, type out the docket number, and just go look through the documents. It's a pretty good database system. The search function is not that great, but as far as documents, you can look and go, oh look, consumer advocate IRs, and what that means is information requests. You can pop one of those open. In the case of Helco, there'll probably be just reams and reams of questions. But you can kind of find particular areas in there, and that'll tell you. But we're faced with, with respect to pricing, I know you folks were subjected to a lot of very technical things, so I can't stand here and talk to you about rate design and how we come up with particular rates. I mean, that would take 2 days, 6 hours, and I should charge you $375. But the process in and of itself is long. It typically ends with negotiations at times, but often as well hearings, evidentiary hearings. Public, like I said, if you have a particular interest, you can always intervene, or you can also intervene as a participant. So meaning that you may only want to be involved for a particular issue. And the commission is actually very open to that. They may be a little more reserved about full intervention status, and you might as well be wary of that as well, because you'll be subjected to questions and having to file so many things. But as a participant, you can see most of what's going on in the docket. You can participate in the hearing in a limited fashion and feel that you'll get your voice heard directly to the commission. And I think that's important. Where we want to say that while it may appear we don't go and address everybody's individual interests, is where it comes to balancing. And so what I'm holding in my hand here was the only thing I did find in my bag that I had with me was our SOP in the PGV's last application, and SOP being our statement of position. So some of the things we state in our statement of position is, these are the items that we have to balance. And so this is what you'll find on the commission's website, because we filed it with the commission. So we have to look and see whether the IPP, what they're seeking as a payment schedule and their sales, and to their assessment of whether the project's feasible. Because they have to take into account, and we have to take into account, that there's issues regarding investments and lending issues. If they don't get that, then the project is dead. And whether the energy was needed or not, it's just not even an issue anymore. So are we doing the consumer a favor? The utility, of course, on the utility side, they want verification that the costs are reasonable. And will they get recovery? Now, I see it as a kind of irony where the utility always has to, the utility is under regulation. IPPs are not regulated. They're just coming in as a vendor and they want to sell, and you know, they probably want as close to dollar for dollar recovery that they can get. The utilities are not going to get that dollar for dollar recovery. They can try and ask for it. We're not going to give it to them. So I think it was Paul that kind of mentioned or touched upon capacity. So while there's business considerations, but if a company does come out and build capacity for development that they think is coming online, and they're going to spend X million of dollars, when we come in and look at it, if that development isn't there, well, thank you very much, but you can eat the rest of that cost, because we're just going to look at the capacity that you're serving. If at some point in the future you're able to serve that capacity, you're able to use that capacity, then we'll give you recovery for that utility. Other than that, whatever negotiations you've entered into, although at times we'll question that in the PPA too. We'll look at the PPA and go, are you sure you want to be paying for this? Why are you paying for that? The ratepayers, of course, you know, the balance is, of course, is a rate increase versus quality issues, reliability issues. Always a consideration. The utility, you know, as much as people don't want to believe, they have quality and reliability issues. How does the power come online? How is it going to interact with their system? That's all just very real issues with them. So again, you know, we're looking at the reasonableness of the PPA, the contribution of, say, in this case, PGV's contribution to the RPS, which is the Renewable Portfolio Standards. Yes, actually, Big Island is doing their share. Oahu is not. Okay, but that's about, I can't comment on that. But, you know, we have to look at that. What is this doing to RPS for the utility? And that's another real issue for the utility. Maybe they can go status quo, but not according to policy. Policy says by 2015 they need to have 25%, or whatever it was. 2030 they need to be at 25%. 2040, or was it 2030 they need to be at 40%. How are they going to get there? How are they going to, you know, comply with that statute? All issues that we try to think about. I mean, maybe the consumer advocate in other states could just put their blinders on and say, we're going to get the lowest rates that we can. But we'll also put some businesses out of business. We'll put some power generators out of business. And we actually have in the past. I think that's happened here on the Big Island with some water utility companies. We've had to be strict with them. Eventually they fold up and they walk away. Probably Vern's been, has noticed that with developments. So a lot of different issues. Pricing, again, you know, it comes down to looking at the PPA. We get that. Like I think with the case with PGV, and it was mentioned, you'll see charges, but with Helco, they pay two different charges. There's a power purchase charge, and then there's a energy charge. But when a rate case comes along, when the rate, like this current Helco rate case, that's when we're going to look at it. We're going to normalize everything, because there's that test year. We're going to normalize what we think. There's some highs and lows. We're going to normalize everything. That's what goes into base rates, and that's what gets added to and goes into the computation of the rate design and what you're ultimately paying as rates. But again, like I said, devil's in the details. I wouldn't be able to stand here and detail to you everything that goes into it and all the minute details, you know, whether you're paying for everything from construction to whether they should or should not have the truck with new tires, you know, so, and that's what you have to trust we're looking at. Thank you.
Can we get a couple of questions before you go?
We'll
Yeah, I
start
think-
with John.
Yeah, with John.
Okay.
Yeah, hey, so, what is the cost, transport? You talked about your, you know, the details and the devil's in the details when you're doing discovery with Helco. What's the actual cost just to transport the power, trucks, poles, wires, to maintain the grid? How much of our bill is just to maintain the grid?
You know, it varies with different rate cases, so I can't, and I don't want to answer that question unless I can actually get actual numbers for you.
You haven't ever been able to get that number? And
Oh yeah, we break it
the
down.
overall, like, just for the overall, like you said, it's 43 cents a kilowatt hour. Just so you roll it all together, what is that cost to transport, just to maintain the grid and transport the power?
For the current Helco rate case and even the past, I don't have it in my head, but I can get it to you.
I'd like to have it, please.
Okay, so I'll take your information.
Okay, because Henry, you know Henry Curtis, probably?
Yes.
And he told me it's a secret. He said even the PUC doesn't have that information, it's proprietary. And that's why, so if you.
Well, it depends what level of details we're talking about, but if you're looking
I
at, you
want
know,
the big number. I don't
yeah,
care about
yeah.
the details.
I think
Just the
we
big
can
number.
give you an idea of the
That'd
big
be
number.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you, John.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Understanding that your office has been traditionally underfunded. You are the consumer advocate. The fact that the consumer advocate has not monetized externalities in their process, taking into account the full scope of the impacts of any project. And that particularly comes home here, where you have not monetized the impacts of geothermal to my community. It has never, and there was an externalities process that went on for 3 years. The workbooks exist and it is doable, but your office has not chosen to do that. And going forward, everything that you do should use that externalities workbook to take in the full scope of what these projects cost the communities where they are impacted.
Okay, thank you. Did everybody hear his point regarding, you said that was an externalities, you say a study?
Yes, it was
Okay.
it was funded through the process. Took 2 years, 2.5 years to do it. Of course, the utility refuses to recognize it. So somewhere in the closet, you'll find it. I have not.
Okay, well, I can tell you that we have had discussions regarding externalities, but yes, you're right that it needs to be more specifically monetized, but that's very difficult to do. Yeah, but no, good point. I'm sorry, the gentleman in front of you.
John, were you at the AKB hearing last night?
No, I was not, but our executive director was there, and he's also in Kona tonight.
That same hearing was held about a year ago. Same AKB, it's basically the same project. PUC turned it down.
Correct.
The consumer advocate,
Supported.
SOP, supported it.
Correct.
How could you screw up so damn bad?
I can tell you that it was not an easy decision, and that even internally we have a lot of concerns going in. But when we had to pick left and right, it was the decision regarding the big picture. Again, just to make it simple and not go into an hour-long discussion, we took left. And so the commission said, no, we're not going to accept that. And, here we come again. We're faced with the same issues. It's not going to be easy again. I think they've dropped the price. about 30 cents or so. And we don't see much difference with what happened the first time. But again, we're going through the process as we speak.
John, you say it's not an easy decision to make. It's a damn easy decision to make. It's so obvious. It's so disappointing. We're paying tax dollars to support your office, and you come back with a recommendation like that.
I think we're special funded, but but no, yeah, I can't speak specifically on that docket. It's a pending docket, but we are taking discovery right now. Any other questions?
You know, you talk about community. I kind of felt we were buying, we don't want, any of the plants in our backyard. That's not true. We do want really truly renewable, truly clean, truly safe industrial plants in our backyard. 100% support it. We would all support it.
Oh, okay.
And not fake renewable industry that is not clean, that is not safe.
Right, and that's what I meant by saying it's probably not a great example, but the point of that comment was that because NIMBY is more of an individual interest in a pocket, in say a particular neighborhood or even a particular individual, it would be difficult for our office to stand in the shoes of one individual when we have to consider the impact on all consumers.
Well, Puna community is a pretty big community. It's not one community.
Right.
And the consumer advocate is consumer advocate, not industry advocate. So that has to be really clear.
True, but we have to look at the interests of the consumers so a lot of times we're looking at, whether one class is actually subsidizing another class. I mean, we have to look across the board like that.
One thing I would propose to you, and I've said this before, and I think it makes sense, I think it's hard to argue with. You should not allow any project to be built on the back of the community. The community should be appropriately compensated and protected. If it can be, then what you're saying makes sense. But when a project is financed on the back of the community, then I think that you haven't done your job. Thank you.
Okay, point well taken.
I'm going to piggyback on this. My one curiosity is when you were talking about you made the comment about the NIMBY, but you were saying that you have to decide what's in the best interest of the consumer, not considering necessarily the individual. But when you're sitting around trying to figure that out, how do you qualify, or what are your what's your analysis? Do you come out to the community?
Well, that's why it's not it is actually a very poor example, but the only thing that I could come quickly to, pointing out the difference between, that whole greater good versus the one. If it was let's say, undergrounding, an application to underground lines, then we are definitely looking and talking to the neighborhood or the street that's involved. And all issues and discussions and debates center right there. But when we're talking about putting in some kind of infrastructure that's going to be served, it's part of an integral part of some transmission line that's going across the island, then there's other concerns. We're looking at relocation costs and various other, time, deadlines. If things have already been put in place, you move that, then you move 10 other things. Okay, so the ratepayer is going to pay X million dollars now to move everything because this is the way it's been planned. This development, we had a situation recently. This development came in after the fact that that substation was going to be there. So when this whole thing was plotted out, it wasn't going to be a house, 2 plots away, that type of thing. But it's not a great example to use. Was there another?
We continue to say the same thing. We're considering us the NIMBY, so we're complaining. It boils down to the same thing. All these entities, all power plants don't care about the stupid NIMBYs and the lunatics in this small area. We are expendable for all of your power needs. We are expendable.
No, that's not what I'm saying, but, and I apologize for if that's the impression I gave.
When it is the idea, when a whole bunch of people are considering, sometimes this one faction that kind of gets in the way isn't considered. We're in a big world with a lot of people.
And what's lost, I think what's lost in the point of my comment was, I want people to know that they should get involved in the process and that they shouldn't feel that they don't have a way to get involved in the process, even as something that seems as big as a rate case. Because when they come to my office, and that's why you'll notice that whenever there's motions for interventions, as much as possible, we'll try to just be, we'll stand off to the side because we'll definitely never oppose a motion for intervention.
You might not be the right guy to answer this question, but in light of Act 97 and Act 55, what is the county's role? Who is the person that we talk to on this island in light of those two acts?
I won't say that you can't call our office to relay your concerns. And maybe I don't understand the full ramifications of your question.
Act 97 is on Mr. Thompson's chart. Act 97 did away with geothermal subbuildings, and as his chart said, leaves the role of the county and its ability in doubt. PLDC moved the decision-making on state lands to law. Who is it that we need to talk to?
No, that's right. Again, we always want to keep our lines open to any concerns. Of course, when it comes to specific jurisdictional questions and permitting questions, of course, we'll forward that or tell you where the appropriate person to speak with. But at the Consumer Advocate's office, and this particular consumer advocate, Jeffrey Ono, he wants to hear as much as possible, and oftentimes he'll get on the phone with you personally. I can guarantee you that.
In general, Tom might be able to help. Just in principle, if they have a problem with the act, do they go to their state legislator? Okay, that's the answer. And maybe
Go over there.
yeah. Can I suggest for questions? Can we just move closer and get off the loud mic and go ahead?
How do the rates compare in terms of what, like Elko or Eco pay for solar and wind? What kind of rates are they paying now for solar and wind? And I know that every PPA is a little bit different, but is there a range that you can speak to?
Your question is, what are the utilities paying for that power? Well, I know, I think for wind, it's been generally a little higher. I think they're in and around about 20. Solar, I can't bring a current one to mind. One concern I shared with someone at the representative was that, one concern we have at the Consumer Advocate is we're not able to really pierce the veil of the IPPs. So what their cost is and how they determine the price that they negotiate with the utility, we don't have access to that. And that's something that we have a concern with. And so, I think some of the IPPs are beginning to be a little more sensitive to that, and hopefully they'll be more forthcoming. But that's been a concern, and I think it's a growing concern with our office.
Paul, could I follow up on Tom's question? You told us in no uncertain terms that geothermal is it. That's the way to go. It's the least price, the least environmental impact. Can you tell me why Helco is screwing around with AKP and Hohonu, which is the Woodford and Pepacao plant, when they could reduce the ratepayers are paying by going with what you said,
Great question. I can't answer it. You know, I mean, there's existing power today that they could procure. There's existing power that's curtailed today that they could contract with no additional. It's not much. I don't know what the AKB contracts are, or how big they are, but there's a small amount of power that's being curtailed out of that 38 megawatts that they could add to the grid to a substantial savings to the ratepayer at about the average between 6 and 9 cents.
we've asked Helco, we supplied the DOE, a spreadsheet that I'm gonna share with you also, that this may be a benefit to get everybody else under the open. If you'll expose what you basically done tonight, what you're representing to us as far as geothermal is concerned, and force these other IPPs and help them, with their numerous power plants, to come forward and show us the same information that you are.
You know, I think there's other policies. You can look at other states and what they require.
Yeah.
I'll give you just two examples. Nevada, for example, the PPA price is confidential. I believe it's for 5 years. So we negotiate the price with the utility, and then the utility has to take it before the PUC. The PUC can have they have a lot of people who get into those confidential hearings. Typically, it's people like the consumer advocate, the lawyers who represent both sides, and they can hear the price and so forth. But it's not released to the public until 5 years after execution. But on the other hand, Utah, the price is made public immediately, so that the public can look at it right along with the PUC and so forth. And so, that's a policy decision for the gentleman in front of me, and at the state legislature and so forth, to figure out if that's something we should require moving forward. And obviously, it's easier for me to talk about it because we have such a competitive price.
Right.
I would love to show it, and I believe those prices must have been made public at some point because they're public in our 10K. So I can get you more information about when they become public and so forth in Hawaii.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If that's the case, if you're so competitive, why are you taking grants from the government? Did you guys get 200 million, ORMAC get $200 million in grants is what was written? And also, I saw where in
Can I answer the first one?
okay, well, it's all part of the same thing, but okay.
Okay, I'll just take it in pieces.
Sure.
So in Hawaii, it's actually kind of interesting. We don't get any state subsidies. We actually pay property and sales tax and so forth that other renewables don't pay. The only benefit we get in Hawaii, the federal production tax credit exists, which pays all renewables 2 cents per kilowatt hour of what they produce, and that's in a tax credit. So if you have a large tax appetite, you can utilize that. If you want to get specific, the ARA stimulus fund recognized that a lot of developers didn't have a big enough tax appetite to monetize that tax credit or to utilize it properly. So they allowed you to take a 30% investment tax credit up front in place of that production tax credit. That is set to expire on December 31st of this year for wind. It expires on December 31st of next year for geothermal. Now, I just want you to keep in mind, that just passed, and you can all remind me what year it passed, but when we look at a 7-year development horizon, we don't take into account whether those subsidies are going to be there or not, because I can't tell you if the production tax credit is going to be here after December or, especially in 8 years. So we have to look at the economics of the project without subsidies.
Well, I think my point kind of...
And then so the next one, I want to answer it.
Yeah.
What we've all read about, the loan guarantee, which was a big stimulus project for the Obama administration.
I didn't bring up the loan guarantee. But
Well, you did, but you worded it wrong, because we went after it, and I believe it was a total of like $360 million that the federal government would provide a backstop to, so that banks could offer us a loan at a very competitive interest rate. And so it's a lot different, and there were a couple loan guarantee programs, and they're easy to confuse. So there was one with Solyndra, where they just got funding to try to develop advanced technologies that hadn't been proven yet. And then there was the section of the loan guarantee program that we got that said, you are not a new innovative technology. but we want to stimulate projects. And so we had 3 projects in Nevada that we would have waited, to do all this work on until we had the appropriate revenue to start construction on them. But with that loan guarantee, and the way our loan guarantee worked is we had to get financed by John Hancock, who actually provided the loan to us. The federal government was just a guarantor of the loan. We received that money, which allowed us to build the McGinnis Hills project, the Tuscarora project, and the Jersey Valley project, all on a very expedited timeline. And we were very successful. We brought all 3 projects online ahead of schedule, and were able to put hundreds of people to work, not only in the facility, but then also during the construction, permitting, and drilling of those facilities. So that project worked really good for us. And we've never taken a dime under the loan guarantee from the federal government. We just had to, we had to negotiate it with John Hancock, and then John Hancock had to negotiate it with the federal government. So it really became, from a business perspective, probably one of the most scrutinized loans we've ever got from a bank, John Hancock, because the DOE loan guarantee program was guaranteeing it. And so that's what you read about in like the House report
I
and
was
so
talking
forth.
about the grants. I want to talk about the TARP funds that you're talking about now, but my question was actually about the grant money. So you don't have to pay the grant money back. And isn't that a subsidized? I mean, you're talking about these great rates you have, but let me finish now. Wait, you just talked for 5 minutes. Let me finish, please. So now, are you talking about these great rates, but aren't you really subsidized? If you're getting $200 million in tax dollars as ORMAT for these different projects, and I know let me just finish, and then you can go for your time. In 2009, and I'm just going by what I read, PGV, for example, got $4 million for this Puna project and $4 million for Maui to do some kind of new technology that we never heard anything about. So you got $8 million of tax money just that I know about for Hawaii. So, I mean, if you're producing power at a certain, you're getting avoided costs, and you're getting millions, hundreds of millions in. So, that, and then I want to talk about TARP, but go ahead.
Yeah, so
Just grants.
we're, there was no grant money for PGV.
No, just
So
Maui.
the grant money specifically is, so you've got the tax incentives for when we actually produce power. You've got the loan guarantees for developing large-scale projects. Then you had these small DOE grants for what was called innovative exploration drilling techniques. And developers could partner with universities and so forth to look at deploying new technologies, because part of DOE's program was to look at how do we make geothermal more cost-effective. How do you drill deeper, cheaper, for lack of a better word. So that is a separate tranche of funding for exploration for R&D projects for DOE. We got, I believe you're probably accurate with your $4 million, not your $200 million, for exploration drilling at Maui. We've been permitting since we were awarded that money. We've never taken receipt of that money, and if we can't permit the project in Maui to use it, we're going to lose that fund. It'll never come to us. So none of that grant money affects the project pricing for the power. It's a separate pile of money for R&D, so that we hope that we can raise all ships with new technology, and that other developers, and all of that information from the DOE grant program is highly scrutinized. It's all online through the DOE Geothermal Technologies program. You can see exactly how much money was granted down to the penny. You can see we partnered probably with
NREL was one.
NREL or the University of Hawaii in some way, because you had to have kind of an academic partner in the project, and you can get all those details online. So to the core of your question, none of that money affects the rate for the power. None of the loan guarantee on the 3 projects in Nevada affected the rate for the power, because all it is a loan.
I'm talking about the grants. I want to get to the loan.
So the grants, yeah, but they haven't contributed to PGV in any way whatsoever, and haven't affected our price or our revenue from it. They're not a revenue generator. That's purely for R&D. If we had never gotten those grants, we'd never do the innovative drilling, and it wouldn't affect PGV.
Okay, and I guess it's just because, you had your pyramid up there with your phases and exploration, and I know, so if there's no huge demand for geothermal, if there's no giant plan for projects, why do you have IDG and Avalor Energy and all these other 20 companies coming down here getting grants to do exploration for geothermal?
They don't, I can't speak for other companies, but I would say that they've got a different business model than we do.
Okay, so why do you have all that land leased at Capone? I was reading where PGB projected, and I think it was Mike that was quoted actually, saying that they thought they had the potential to produce 200 megawatts of power on the lands that they've already leased, which includes the Four Corners, all the Lyman lands, basically. So why are you, don't let me finish, why are you talking about producing 200 megawatts in one hand, and then the other hand, you're coming here now and you're saying, oh, well, there's no way that's going to happen?
And you said it exactly right. There is 200 megawatt potential. There's probably 500 megawatts of potential. The problem is that there's the potential and what you plan to produce are two different things.
So
And
why are you leasing the
there's
land?
no demand. So in Iceland, for example, there are thousands of megawatts that could be developed because you have continental spreading above the seafloor. And we've developed projects there. But unfortunately, Iceland has the population of about 360,000 people. And because we can't get the power from Iceland to Europe, or Iceland to anywhere else for that matter, they're stuck. One of the things that they tried to do for economic development was bring in large energy consumers
So
and
why
things
lease
like
all
that.
the land? If that's true, why lease all the land? If you don't have no plans and you're not going to develop it, why you have all this land leased for all these years?
Protection of the resource. We don't want any of those companies you mentioned to come in and start trying to drill right next to our existing facility. And should there ever be a demand for additional power, we'd like the potential to expand the facility.
So Four Corners isn't anywhere near your power plant. Four Corners is quite a ways from your power plant. And also, isn't it true that Helco peaked in 2004, that was their peak use of power? And since 2004, even though population's been growing, the power demands on this island have been dropping.
Probably.
Okay.
Probably speak to that.
It's actually been dropping since '08 when the prices of oil was skyrocketed.
Yeah, I read 2004.
Which is what squashes the demand for future for us to develop anything else.
Well, that's going to lead into something else, but I don't want to hog the whole show. So I'll come back.
Paul, I have a follow-up to that. Are you planning on developing, following the Iceland model of developing industries that use the extra power?
Look, all we are is a geothermal developer. I mean, that's what we know. We don't know anything about creating aluminum or large-scale economic development. And I think your council members right in front of you are going to dictate what future industries are here. All we try to do is fill a demand for power. So, if all of you approve something like that, and there was a need for power, we would try to fill it. But we're not actively engaging trying to bring anybody here to consume large additional amounts of power. Bob is right that we have a large pipeline of additional projects. What's made us successful is we have leases all over the country and all over the world. And so we look at it's kind of a pipeline of potential projects, and we can sit on them for years and decades and so forth. And so right now, we're actively developing in Central America, the Philippines, New Zealand, places that are having this boom, and we're producing the power. Right now, with no additional demand in Hawaii, we've got no additional plans for development here.
What about the plan to produce hydrogen? I understand, you're starting an experimental plant, and we're concerned about you turning, the plant into a hydrogen facility.
We've heard this a couple times. We were actually approached, and Mike might have we're thinking at the next quarterly meeting, we should bring in HNEI, Hawaii,
Mitch Hewitt.
Nevada, okay,
Natural Energy
to explain what they want to do. Because in short, it's a test project that all they want is cheap power to power their electrolyzer and so forth. And they targeted us not for any other reason than we have curtailed power that they can get very, very affordably that they can't get anywhere else on the island. That contract isn't inked or anything, and I believe it's a test project.
Yes.
But I think for another meeting, we'd be happy to bring him in and explain that project fully, because I don't know all the details.
I'd like you to do that, because I was at his meeting in Kiao last week, and since then, we've seen a chart that shows them ramping up to megawatts of power consumption.
And so
conjunction
that,
with PGD
we're
expansion.
committed to bringing him in there to explain that, and we can look at it as well, because there's no contract signed with us, and there's not that much curtailed power to do, like I said, our max output, as Mike said, is currently 34 megawatts. It'll go up to 38,
So it's 4 megawatts is what you have.
I don't even know if that's what they're discussing for the test project. I think it's a much smaller amount to see, there's not a lot of tricky science behind it. To run an electrolyzer, you just need a lot of power. The idea would be neat if you could run a hydrogen bus system. The biggest hurdle you have is you don't have a limitless power supply. So for his project development in the future, that's his expertise on that. And we would be happy to, I think this is the perfect kind of thing to facilitate that discussion, to get to the bottom of what, maybe what his 50-year plan is versus what we're committing to as a test project for excess power. Please.
There is a paper on the internet that Bob sent some people saw, and it has written out plans for the future for hydrogen. I think at PGV it goes on quite a ways in the future. It's a rather long 50-page or something document. But I just wonder, you say there's no contract signed, but I wonder what informal discussions you folks may have had about a future larger hydrogen project.
There's no discussion about a future larger project. It's just a 2-year project that,
I understand
yeah.
for this particular.
We have not
One of
entered.
the camels knows under the tent, but there is a long document which perhaps me or Bob can send you.
Yeah, that'd be
That
good.
has very detailed
Is that from
plans.
Mitch? From
No,
Mitch?
it's not. We found it ourselves. No, he didn't show this to us.
Oh, okay.
But you had said the other night in Kial that you would consider larger. You're going to look at this as a business. Unless I misunderstood you.
Okay.
I think, and maybe I'll just.
No. He said it. Let's hear
I'm going
what
to
he-
say, look, we sell electricity.
Right.
If anything gets approved or built that creates a demand for electricity, we're open to discussion on purchasing the power. Are we going to, Ormat doesn't have any, we don't have any hydrogen production business. We're not the experts on that.
I understand
We're
that, but-
just going to, so if you think of us as a
but-
utility.
Okay, so let's look at it this way. The reason that they're putting this hydrogen at your plant is so they don't have to send this power through the grid, involve Helco and all of that. So if they want to build a huge hydrogen plant, the same principle is going to involve. They're going to want to put it right in the middle of our residential community, and that's what we're getting at. And there's a lot of other things here that I don't want to dominate this whole conversation.
I think it would be a great idea for our next quarterly meeting, because if you don't want a hydrogen program here, don't approve a hydrogen program here.
No, we love hydrogen. We don't want it in a residential community. We
Perfect.
want it in an industrial area where
Yeah.
it belongs.
No, and for us, we're impartial. We put the electricity on the grid. We don't care where you locate the facility
Wait a
with the
second,
electrons.
you're giving it to the pilot program for gratis, right?
Sorry?
Aren't you giving the electricity to the pilot program for gratis?
Yes.
That's the proposal
Yeah.
that hasn't been executed. So we'll write that down, and we'll try to bring him in to explain what his test proposal is versus his large-scale development ideas.
Well, it could be going already by the time of the next meeting, because they wrote the draft environmental assessment, they had a meeting, and it could be a done deal by the time the next meeting rolls
They
around.
also said they don't need any permits. John's got his hand up there. He's claiming he needs no permit at all to build it. Fred and Donald, this developer, the hydrogen guy, came and said, we don't need a permit. I can't build a chicken coop without a permit. This guy can build a hydrogen manufacturing experiment with no permit. So, I'm concerned about that. I don't think that's right. And anyway, John's been waiting a long time. I feel guilty.
And I don't want to guarantee anything either. I mean, all we can do is invite them to come speak and see if they'll come speak at the forum. But we'll ask them, and we'll try to facilitate that if the county council doesn't do it before us. Please.
Yeah, I think before the consumer avenue, another issue was raised before we move on to your air and noise monitoring program, because I'd like to go there next. He used the word, in your considerations of proposals, he used the word firm power. Well, we live on an island that has no oil. The utility, its power is just as firm as the next grader that arrives. You use pentane. Your power is just as firm as the next truckload of benzene. Without it, you shut down. So, the only thing that I can absolutely, positively, and unequivocally guarantee you that tomorrow morning at 6:07, the sun will come up. And we can argue about how much, but we can't argue about whether or not it will be there. So, whatever else you want to talk about in this whole argument about firm power, solar is the only firm power on this island. Because the distribution chain for all petrochemical is thousands and thousands and thousands of miles long. So this discussion is pretty senseless in that context. Just want to get that on the record.
And a lot more job positions.
Moving on to the discussion that we had earlier about your air monitoring and your noise monitoring. I think correct me if I'm wrong, I believe I heard her say that they are basing the criteria for the air monitoring for H2S on the data that was collected from the blowout.
Karen's here, so she can answer those
That's,
questions.
okay.
I am here. I was just speaking to the range, the
Yes.
fact that our range for the H2S.
So you're assuming that, and this is a question, not a statement. You are assuming that the release quantities of H2S were as high during that event as they ever would be in setting your high. You do not have an ongoing assessment of the quantity of H2S in the resource at the wellheads like yesterday or last week.
That's an excellent question. When I mentioned the 12,000 parts per billion from the blowout, that was what our perimeter sensors were able to pick up at the time. That's not necessarily the max at that time of the blowout, and it's certainly not necessarily the max going forward. Our full range goes up all the way to 20,000 parts per billion, so it's just to give you a sense of scale of what our sensors are capable of measuring versus what we know has occurred in the past. For the second part of the question, I'm not aware of any.
I do. So we do monitor H2S concentration on every well on an annual basis, sometimes twice a year. And historically, the H2S concentration has gone down. Back in 1991, it's about 1,200 parts per million at the well. And today, it's in the order of 600 to 800 parts per million.
If you will recall, there was an event. I believe it was after the blowout. You had a lot of dignitaries, police hanging around, and it made the headlines, and we've got a copy of it somewhere, where it said something in the neighborhood of 24,000 or 25,000 parts being released. That was the headline, lethal levels released. And so I'm just asking you, you are monitoring on an ongoing basis the concentration, and at current levels, you're looking at 600 parts per million
That's
at the wellhead.
At the wellhead.
Okay. If I may move on to the noise monitoring.
I just handed out, if you guys don't have it,
Oh, yeah, we got 'em.
you got all this?
Yeah.
Okay, which shows you, so the levels that EPA has set for H2S on here and so forth. And just, so for the folks in the room, the maximum during the blowout was how many parts per million?
That we measured as well.
Okay, so the maximum in that incident, the worst blowout, we've ever had, or geothermal has ever had, was 12 parts per million. So just to keep, so you can look at that and where it fits on the scale.
I understand you were not the operator at the time. When the EPA went and looked at your data from that blowout, because at the time the monitoring was questionable, the monitors had not been certified in a very long time, and Dr. Goddard, when he did his analysis for EPA of the blowout afterward, he noted that in his document, it's available, that the monitoring system criteria was not sufficient to certify for any purpose. it was only an estimate, you'd only considered it an estimate. So we can't really,
Okay.
that's a no-go. So anyway, getting back to the noise thing, you're averaging the noise peaks, or the noise over 5-minute intervals?
Well,
So,
we collect the 1 minute data, but yes, when we report it, it goes into 5-minute averages. and
right,
that's
so
how we
what would the average look like if you have a momentary peak of, say, 120 or 130 decibels?
So that would get averaged, it depends on what scale you're looking at. So one of
Exactly.
the
So what
features
scale
of
are
the
we
new
looking
feature, so one of the scales, one of the features of the new website is you're gonna be able to control that.
No, what scale are we looking at?
You'll be
A,
able to
B,
choose.
C, D, I have some familiarity with the weighting systems.
I think I know John's question. He's saying is if you have a momentary noise level recorded at 100 dBA, what would be the 5-minute average?
Well, typically the numbers go from 40 to 54 is from my experience generally where the decibel levels fall. So if you do have a peak for say 1 minute, you're not going to see that and say what's reported at the monthly level.
Yeah, see, that's exactly my point. In the middle of the night when it goes to 130 dB momentary, like when they slam together a 100-foot length of drilling pipe, it doesn't show up on your system, but it does show up in my bedroom.
No, it will now because you can go you can see the 5-minute increments.
Yeah, that's what we have the alarm set for. So when we set the 70 decibel level, that is specifically targeted at a 5-minute average. So in the example that you're giving, that would, more than likely, it depends on what the other data points are for the other 4 minutes in that 5-minute average, but that would likely trigger the alarm for the operators, which we actually set below the permanent level at 68 decibels, and they'll be aware of that immediately to address that.
Yeah, we are.
But the damage is already done, isn't it? In other words, I think you probably haven't heard this. I grew up in California. I watched Standard Oil drill oil wells on La Cienega Boulevard. That is the land of 10,000 lawyers. They don't make a noise. They completely encase those drill rigs. You can walk up right to them. You know they're running because you can feel it in the ground. They open the doors twice a day, take deliveries, let people in and out. There's not a squeak that comes out of those rigs. So don't tell me that you can't control the noise. I've seen it done. Professionals do it. So there is no preventive on this side. It's all reactive. And we are always less than the beneficiaries of that. So, I mean, and this has been from day one. And I realize that, in fact, Ormat was only, what, a 30% stakeholder in the beginning, when Constellation owned it. So you were a minority owner from day one. So you're not completely clean on this.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. I think if I could try to answer it two ways. One, I think the point that you're getting at is that the DBAs allowed under the permit are too high, and we could revisit it to get it lower. And number two, we drilled six wells before this most recent one, and maybe it was our mistake, or maybe you guys didn't come to us. We didn't get the feedback that we're getting on this operation, and whether it's location or something. Well, no. So
at what point did you become God and we must come and pay homage to you? You run a 39 megawatt power plant, which in the world of power plants is like 6 mongoose in a wheel, right?
Right.
I mean, I grew up in a place where power plants were tens of thousands of megawatts, real power plants.
I'm not saying that
this thing produces nothing but annoyance. That's all it's ever been, is simply an annoyance. It creates no jobs, creates no significant amount of energy. It's just a pain in the ass. Right? So, if you be quiet, quit stinking, we look the other way. You don't rub us the wrong way, you do what you do.
And we're going to try to do that. And for our next rig over, where we've committed to trying to use 3 new technologies, and for our next rig, we're going to look at new technologies to be quieter.
Who's regulating you? Who's controlling you? Who's coming to your plant and checking and monitoring, checking that the neighbors are safe?
I can-
Who's doing that? And why is the county council member asking for you, for PGV, to be excluded from Bill 292 with the geothermal noise? Why would a county council
We can say
exclude
who's
an industry?
regulating. So you got 2, we'll take it in 2 parts. One, all the permits that we have to get, Mike can just run you through.
Yeah, so on the noise side, even on the H2S side, is the Department of Health, Clean Air Branch. They oversee, we have a permit with them, we need to comply with, and the LNR oversees.
How often does the Department of Health come to your facility to check, make sure that all monitors are working fine? And what, one monitor? The Department of Health has one monitor?
Well, Department of Health comes out maybe once a quarter. During drilling, they come out maybe once a week, once a month. Annually, we do an audit to make sure that we're in compliance with our permit. And if anyone has complaints about air quality, you can call the Department of Health and they will come out.
You know, Mike, I called the Department of Health and I said, has any industrial facility ever violated the 70 dBA?
Right.
And they said, no, not in my memory, right? So you can tell it's set way too high if no industrial facility has ever violated it. And you're in our backyard. It's not like you're in downtown Hilo.
I
Yes,
gotta ask one question about the monitors. I mean,
go ahead.
I'm
Okay,
sorry,
Paul, I mean,
I interrupted.
What
Go
I was
ahead,
going to
Mike.
suggest is that as soon as we get our new data up and running, is to go through it, because I mean, I know you had requested looking at older.
So by the way, what we requested back in February of last year was the actual raw data. So could we have the data at 1-minute intervals, which is what you collected
You
at?
can look at it for the last 5 years.
Can we do it at 1-minute intervals?
Not on the website.
Five minutes.
We want it at 1-minute intervals because it gets washed out in the averages, as you well know.
For the noise data, not the other types.
sulfide he's talking about, oh, noise.
Well, noise would be a start.
Yeah, so for the noise in our monthly reports, we do look at what the maximum values were at the 1-minute interval, and that does get submitted in our reports. Perhaps that's something you can request from.
So that's something we've been requesting since February, and we were told to wait until the website.
So that's what my suggestion was. As soon as we get that going, take a look at it, Paul. See what else, any suggestions or other information you're thinking.
I can tell you right now what we want is a 1-minute interval. So if we could get that,
And DOH won't give that to you?
we've asked them, no. You know what, they came back and they said, you know, we're gonna charge you per page,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
so they'll give it to you.
Freedom of Information Act, charge you per page.
How
So,
many pages?
and what we want is, we want it in a database format, electronic format, so we can actually look at it and do some analysis. So if you'd give that to us, we'd really appreciate it.
I'll just go with the 10 second. Just go 10 seconds. Forget the minute. Just put it at 10 seconds. Every 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds.
Well,
Every second.
actually, do you,
Every second.
actually, do you, at what interval do you collect the data?
Listen to John.
1 minute.
Well, for noise, we collected at 1 minute. For everything else, it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, so we want the data as it's actually collected.
Paul, you know, I think the big mistake that,
Sorry, one correction. H2S is also at 1 minute. That's just not something I look at per minute.
Oh, it's
But
1 minute.
We do have it at the 1 minute. Can I ask you about?
And I just want to, before we forget the question that you had about Bill 292, so we have requested to be, whatever you said, are exempted. I think the question, we've downright opposed the bill because stopping drilling all these times at night would prolong the project, it wouldn't reduce the noise, and it's very dangerous to the well integrity and to the workers and so forth. So we've across the board been opposed to 292. I think what you're referring to is there's a jurisdictional question, and we're waiting to see what corporate counsel, I guess, well, we're waiting to see what happens to the bill. There's going to be a public hearing on Friday, but we've from the very beginning been opposed to the bill across the board for public safety.
Technically possible to meet residential limits at PGV for noise.
Is it possible?
Is it technically possible to meet residential decibel limits at PGV?
You know, this sounds like another meeting to maybe, look, we're not sound experts. Again, we develop geothermal power plants, and we try to do them in places that aren't right next to residents and so forth. But I think that's a great. A lot of these questions I think revolve around: are the limits wrong? What's the lowest you can do economically? There's an economic component I think in there, and why isn't DOH? So we're not the ones to ask because we don't know the answer. I guess the question is, can we put Cardinotech and DOH in a room to kind of discuss a lot of these questions? And maybe that's a quarterly meeting we can set up and try to get DOH here.
It's a technical question, and then that's a question of DOH.
No,
We have third-party consultants and so forth for that, for sound.
Little simple technical measures, 25 feet, on your wonderful little trailer monitors that you have now. It seemed, and you went all through it, it seemed to be where you collected is that top little area of your, what?
10 meters.
5 meters,
was it
which
10
is
meters or 5
between
meters?
15 and 20 feet, right, above the ground. And here we are back to it again. We were all told that the sulfur's down here, and yet again, you now have new monitors with collection at 15 to 20 feet above the ground. Could you explain that to me?
Certainly. I also brought with me Bob Whittier. He's been with us for quite a while. He started this project in 1997. He doesn't work full-time for us anymore, but he can speak to that and probably once we put up some of the...
How does that
Well,
collect?
right now, we'll just kind of go through it. First off, I don't know who's saying that the sulfur is on the ground, because,
If it's hydrogen sulfide, it's not sulfur.
Okay,
well, it's still sulfur.
It's
is
a heavy
this the
gas.
correct level
But-
for the monitors? Is that
Let's
Wilson
correct?
got it.
take this kind of step by step. here
Wilson
first.
Goddard, the expert from California that did the blowout, is the one that said that.
Okay, let's take it step by step. It's not,
We don't want to hear it all. We just
a release plume is not totally H2S. Air is a mixture of gases. And if you get it at the, let's say the 12,000 that was measured during the blowout, that's 12,000 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide. If you look at the relative density of that, relative density of pure hydrogen sulfide to air is 1.2. It's 1.2 times denser than air. But if you look at the relative density of that plume, it is like 1.0006 or something. I got that. So it's absolutely, well, almost no density difference between the plume and the air itself. The other technical problems, though, with lowering the intake. One, if the intake, if we lower it at the monitoring stations to the breathing zone, which I believe is what you're getting at, is not the breathing zone at your house. That's kind of a stagnant air pocket right in front of the trailer, and you want to get that air that's moving across the top of the trailer, which is moving from the property boundary to the residents downwind.
Well, let me just say this on the monitoring then, because here's what's going on, and Mike can attest to this. In August, I believe it was, they had the plant startup, and they had some leaks. I was outside of the property boundary, and I could smell it. The monitors all read 0. That's what we were told. And that happened several times during that day. Then more recently, they had a hose break. Same thing. The things are reading 0. The monitors are reading 0. Having lived there for 30 years and driven through this stuff from HGPA, the blowout, all of it, I can tell you that gas pools, and you can talk this stuff, and you're a scientist, and you may understand it, but real life on the ground, living there, stuff pools in the lower areas. And the Department of Health monitor, I went and looked at all the monitors a couple of times recently. Department of Health monitors at 6 feet. Their intake is at 6 feet at the recommended, and that was the recommended height from the state, the expert that the state hired, Wilson Goddard, is where he said that thing should be. So it kind of contradicts what you're saying. And
well, yeah, it does contradict, and I still think that it is incorrect to put it down that low.
So why
But
are,
going back, okay, let's go back to the, you said that there was a hose break some time ago, and actually that come up in a conversation. And that would look more like that potentially that plume went between the stations. It was not a case of it pooling or moving along the ground. It was more of, yes, there's a pretty big gap between, and that's would be a more
okay,
logical.
so there's another thing. After 30 years, after 25, 30 years from HGPA all the way through now, you guys haven't figured out where to place those monitors. And you have this great meteorological station with all this meteorological data, but your plumes are missing the monitors. And I'm telling you, because I live there, and I've told Mike and I've told everybody that would listen to me, where we smell it, where it pools, and it's right in front of the old HGPA power plant. You have the closest monitor towards Luana's house, up towards Pahoa more, and you have them up high, and then you have your intakes up high. I mean, I just, you know, it really, and it's not personal against you, it's this whole monitoring program, and it just really rings hollow that after all this time and all this money and spent on all these different things, that right now, today, if there's a leak over there, people in the community can smell that stuff and your monitors are going to read 0. I'd say that's a defective monitoring program. It's inefficient, doesn't work, and it's never worked. And so we don't have good data. We do not have good data because the monitors, for whatever reason, you can explain it however you want to, but I can tell you I live there and I've smelled it in that community many, many, many times, and I'm always told that it's no readings or it's low readings, and you know.
The monitors do pick up H2S.
Then why are they why can I smell it and your monitor reads 0?
Why are my eyes?
No, seriously, I mean, how high does it have to be for me to smell it? And I don't know when they're having these things. I mean, I don't have inside scoop. I'm driving by, I smell it, and I actually call people to come to verify it. So I'm not the only one that smelled it. So we smell it, but the monitor's reading 0. You're saying it's just going between the plumes, but this has always happened. It's always happened. Do you understand that? For many, many, many years. I think you have a real problem with your monitoring program. I really believe that you have a problem.
I guess I got a question here now.
Is there any way that you can provide some of these homeowners with monitors for a few months? I mean, that would be data. These people are saying they can smell it in their yard. Put monitors there. Let them see what it is. You see what it is. It's all open. Nothing's hidden. You know, I mean, really, doesn't that just sound logical?
I think there are homeowners with monitors.
We don't have it.
Al used to have it.
Yeah, but then somebody busted it, you know? I mean,
You know,
we
there's
never
no
got,
way
we've
he
been
said,
asking for
she
that
said,
stuff for
and,
years.
you know?
So I think, if I can try to make sense of it, you know, again, I think a discussion with DOH and a monitor. The issue with, I think, giving, and these guys can maybe speak, they're the experts on it, but there's background H2S in the area because we live on an active rift zone. And so the question is, what our perimeter monitors are trying to do is to say what's coming from or to the plant.
But
If you
that
had,
would be
if
pretty
you,
easy because if
no, well, it's a little trickier because if you had a monitor sitting at your home, there's no telling where the source of H2S came from. And so this is what.
yeah, but you're monitoring at your plant, and they're monitoring at their
Right,
houses.
right.
And if yours goes up and theirs
Yeah, but-
goes up, guess where it came
But
from?
if Bob's point is right,
One of
that the wind direction changed or something, and you'd have a good
Right,
case
like
if you
here's
said
your plant,
the monitor
and
triggered
here's
here
the
and here.
houses.
Right now, we're saying we're having no triggering at these monitors. I think the question is we need to have a, you know, with DOH discussion on what are we doing with the perimeter monitors, you know? And I think you asked a question that I think is good. What level can you smell it at versus what the monitors pick up?
Well, you can smell it less than 5 parts per billion. Monitors get about 1 parts per billion. So you should, if you can smell it, the monitor should pick it up.
Okay.
Paul, can Ormat build a plant, this is a closed plant? Are you capable of building a plant that will not emit H2S?
During normal operations, our plant doesn't emit H2S. So he's talking about an upset condition, whether we're kicking off a well or something like that, where you have the natural H2S emission.
So you cannot build or operate a plant without having emissions.
Oh, you don't want to say you don't.
Entirely, no, you're-
H2S, no plant's that high.
What's
I
that?
mean, we got engineers in here. We
Yeah.
know that you're always emitting H2S. It's just the nature of engineering, bland seals, bland leak off, all of those things.
That's the fugitive emissions you're getting from this.
Right.
So the fugitive, you can't build a plant without fugitive emissions.
Correct.
Is ORMAT capable of building a plant that will not create noise impacts in the neighborhood?
Depends who you're asking.
No. It's,
Well, it does.
Paul, you brought it up, and Tom Ye brought it up, and it's really offensive to me.
What's that?
You said it tonight. Our permit allows us to screw the neighborhood, and that's very offensive. Yeah, you wrote the 6-page letter about we're permitted to make noise, and I'm asking you tonight, Paul, because we had a little discussion before the meeting. Is ORMAT capable of constructing a GT plant that does not impact the neighborhood? In other words, the noise, Mitch from Hydrogen said, I will not permit noise to leave my boundaries.
Well,
I will do everything.
You have engineers in here as well. That's look. I don't know the point that you're trying
See,
to
if
get
you
at. We
answered
want
that-
to try to make it as quiet and as benign as possible. That's our goal.
We wouldn't even be here tonight. These people
I
would not be
understand.
here tonight. This is 2012. You've been there. And to come up and say, we're permitted to make the noise, no, that doesn't fly. We need to be here saying tonight, and I thought we were going to hear some more of this, Mike. We want to hear how ORMAT is going to run that plant without impacting the neighborhood. And that's, because you're poison, as I told you, you are poisoning the geothermal well.
And I said it once, and I'll say it again.
Yeah.
And I'll keep saying it. We're going to deploy the technologies to try to attenuate as much sound as possible. So for our next workover rig, we're going to deploy a Maxim, I think 51 muffler to hospital grade sound standards. We're going to wrap it in sound blankets, and we plan to use the sound walls and so forth for future large drilling operations. So we're going to attempt to do that. We've already put in some sound walls around the facility, and I think the continuing study is how can we greatly affect the sound and reduce it.
So you're committing to the neighborhood that you are striving to eliminate the noise impact from the neighborhood.
Absolutely. And we've sent that.
Time frame, Paul.
And we've sent that in a letter to the county council, which Bob saw. It said, these are the 3 things we're doing on this next.
I sent it to all you guys.
Yeah, I saw it. I read it.
Okay, so you know the letter. So
Yeah.
that's for the October project. And then when we know that's the workover for an existing well, there's no drilling involved. It's just a matter of hanging a new liner in a well and so forth. Then when the next drilling operation comes, we've committed to not only notifying the county council of what the plan of work is going to be, but what attenuation devices we're going to implement.
And Paul, that's what we want to hear. We don't want to hear we're permitted to destroy the neighborhood.
think
We
you're
want to hear what you said tonight.
Perfect. No, that's
mischaracterizing what
and
was
and I'm
said.
just saying, that's, and we get this question about what assurances do we have and so forth, and that, you have, I guess, our word for it in things if it's not regulated. And I'm not saying that regulation is a good thing or a bad thing, but, part of the question about noise, was, and the question, we're not thinking we're God or something. We've got to hear it from you guys, and you've done a fantastic job, and the council has done a good job of bringing it to our attention that we were clearly inept before on this, and we're going to attempt to do our best. But we're going in uncharted territories because there's not really guidelines for us to follow on this. But we're going to be making our best chance, and we'll bring you out and let you look at it and see, and then I hope that everybody in the room has the same idea of what quiet versus noisy is.
We've heard this before.
Well, we have laws in the county, no dock, no.
And look, I understand it. Words
No, I
mean
just wanna
nothing.
say,
So all you can, there's,
When
I
you're
said,
looking at people
yeah,
and they seem
no, no,
skeptical,
that's-
it's not the first time we've heard that.
I've my grandparents say actions speak a lot louder than words. So we understand that.
You only get to spend once your book.
Sorry.
I have 2 quick questions. One is, did not the civil suit that was settled by the Hawaii Supreme Court dictate that you would use best available current technology, and why are we waiting over 15 or 16 years to do it? And the second is, does the monitoring system provide sufficient accuracy for the actual exposure of H2S to ensure there's no low-level exposure?
So, Tom, with regards to BACP, it is a requirement in the GRP. It's a county permit. It's a requirement. And although we have not shared all the details of what we've been doing throughout the years, I think one time you asked me, Bob, hey, can you do better? And I think my response was, yes, we can do better. Okay. And let me clarify on what I meant by that. In the power generation industry, there's this process, it's called continuous improvement. It's one of the processes that we follow real closely, because we're always looking for new things that come up. We're always trying to implement new technology, and we've been doing that throughout the years. You know, so we've been implementing BACP. There may be something that's out there and available today that we're not aware of, and maybe we have not, we haven't used it yet. But the latest BACT, I think it's in the email. There's what referred to as the Millennium Metal.
You said it was BACT, but now if we think about what John said, where they have a completely enclosed drill rig with no sound at all. So how is that not BACT? And what you're talking about, the blankets BACT?
We're going to look at, I mean,
you're weighing it against economics.
Well, not just economics. I mean, we care about the folks that work there. If we fully enclose that plant,
not the plant, the drill rig, I think.
Oh, the drill rig.
Look, I think we don't know what specifics John brought up about it, but if you bring us that information and we evaluate it, we'd be happy to look at it. There's nothing that,
I think you guys need to be a little more proactive. You're the experts here. You had access to a lot more information than
you get paid. I don't.
We're not noise experts though, so we can bring someone in.
Hopefully, like the quarterly meetings and so forth like that, we want to get that information and intel, and we'll try to deploy it. And there's the plant operations, which operate 95% of the time, and then there's the drilling operations, which we hope are few and far between.
I wanted to add a little bit more about the noise. The GRP also requires that we do a noise study through the planning department, and we've done that. I don't know if anyone here was at Leilani Association, but we brought the engineer in. Actually, he came in when Civil Defense, and remember the noise guy? Ben wasn't there?
I wasn't there.
You wasn't there, it was John. John, yeah. Anyway, but this noise guy has done this work as a requirement of the GRPs, and that was part of the expansion. And so he is committed to provide a report to the planning department. We'll take a look at it. There's going to be recommendations. One recommendation I am aware of is putting up additional noise barriers at the new plant. So that's something that we definitely will be looking at, and that's part of our BACP process.
Just have some of your staff spend the night in Aurora's old house next time you guys do a project. I mean, test case.
Okay.
And I have another question. There's a presentation at After Dark in the park, at Volcanoes Park, by Jim Kay and another scientist. And I didn't see it, but I heard they concluded that the geothermal resource at PGV unfortunately is going to dry up. I think it's something about the brine will get thicker and the rocks will get less permeable. I don't understand all the details. I wonder if you guys are familiar with that and what you think.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
One of
I'll
our
give you the
future meetings,
details.
we can ask Jim to join us.
I will give you the details how to get the DVD of that presentation.
My other question was, what is the adequacy of it seems like to me in your discussion that your monitors were positioned mostly to detect accidents in the plant. That if they don't, what I was interested in is the lower levels that might be closer to the ground. Is the monitoring accurate enough that you can use those as a baseline for exposure to low-level H2S?
The short answer is yes. In that you can, the accuracy or the detection level is probably in the range of 1 part per billion. So if that gets to the intake, that will be picked up.
Did the EPA in the 2000 study, January 2000 release study, recommend lowering the detectors so that they would more closely represent the low-level exposure that was given to the occupants around?
Well, I think, okay, we're talking about two different things. If you're talking about low level, you're talking about elevation rather than concentration.
No, I'm talking about low-level concentrations, and your elevation, it seems like to me, is designed to positively identify when there's a problem with the plant, but not necessarily to speak to the chronic low-level exposures that come from the plant.
Fugitive emissions.
That's not to say that we know there are any chronic. I'm just asking about the monitoring system.
But I guess my point is that it would pick up those chronic low-level emissions from the plant if they are present. Because it is a very
Well, the EPA study released in 2000 recommended lowering those monitors because it said it would not be able to measure that. I can provide the reference if you like.
Yeah, certainly I'd be interested in looking at that, but
Okay, I'll be glad to.
I really would be skeptical of anything that said there was a concentration gradient from 15 meters, or 5 meters down to ground level.
Well, when you described that, the way you said that there would be was because of the plume. And if it's low-level concentration with low wind speeds, you have both a higher density difference, and it would seem like to me that you would see exposures at lower heights.
I guess the other thing that I'd like to do, okay, still the chronic would be a plume too. There would be no density difference. In fact, the density difference would be even less to not even measurable. And so as the air moves, if it's wind driven, it's going to tumble and it's going to mix, and you'll get uniform concentration up to some height well above our intakes.
Okay, thank you.
Pardon?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to speak to the author of that report, his name is Mike Ardito, he's in Region 9.
Well, I think that you were going to provide it to Ron, and he can provide it to me. I'd like to copy that report. That'd be interesting.
Ron?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe online, isn't it
It's
online?
epa.gov, search PUNA. It's the first hit.
I got a horrible memory.
epa.gov.
Well, I know EPA.gov.
It's so easy. I don't know. Too much on that site. It's hard to navigate.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're running over our allotted time, and we wanted to say thank you so much for coming out. We're gonna hold additional meetings. We took some notes, the noise folks, DOH, etc. And in addition, if you folks have our contact, Heidi or Paul, myself, you can send us information on other topics of interest, and we'd be happy to put that together.
A couple of quick things. How much do you re-inject an hour? You told me once.
I think it's probably 3,000 gallons per minute.
3,000 gallons per minute, so it's almost 4 million gallons a day.
It's 3,000 gallons per minute that comes up.
No,
3,000
I
gallons per minute
understand.
that goes back
I
down.
understand. That's just a lot. I just want people to realize what we're talking about. 4 million gallons, close to it, 3.75 million gallons.
3 times 24.
And then the other thing, you keep talking about 34 megawatts, but you told me you were back to 22. Is that changed?
No. It doesn't. When they say 34, that's the best we can do. Thank you guys, everybody. Hey, we got to clean up and everything, but if you guys got little side questions, just feel free to come and talk. Oh, and please, help yourself to some food.
Oh, you know what? Can I get a...
You can feed your chickens.
No.
Huh?
I grow my own.
Oh. Anyway,